No sign of Dennis. Oh, there he is. Excellent. All right. How you doing, Dennis?
Hello.
Good
My
timing.
browser just crashed, so I had to restart it, like right when I joined.
So this is where, in the run-up to your talk, you tell us a little bit about what this talk is about. Just give us a quick summary and let everybody know. Go.
Okay, so this talk is about my experiences from translating C code into D code, because I often find myself doing that first from just small snippets I found from like Windows API examples, and later single file libraries, and ultimately even bigger libraries for a variety of reasons, including being easier to build or easier to edit, because D is my preferred language, of course. So all these experiences culminated into me, first of all, telling about like things I learned, some pitfalls to avoid, and also the tool I developed, because translating by hand was very tedious. So I developed something to kind of do the simple syntax translation for you. So all you have to do left is the difficult macro translations and stuff like that.
You announced that tool earlier this year, right? Wasn't it this year or was it last year?
Yeah,
It was this year.
that's right.
Yeah, I
I
remember
actually
seeing it
developed
before.
it like a year or two ago,
Uh-huh.
or 1 year ago maybe. But recently, Steven Scheifhofer asked me about it because he is translating raylibd. And yeah, I wanted to publish it for a while, but it's kind of, yeah, I forgot to do it. It has always a bit of, I had to fix the Windows build and some other things I wanted to do before publishing, and
Uh-huh.
never got around to it until like recently. And yeah, so it's a nice time to make a backup talk for DConf.
Hmm. Yeah, and you did
So,
start out as the backup because you did not submit this talk, and I am grateful
no.
for you doing it because it turned out we needed you. So I'm glad
Yeah,
you're
I
here.
actually considered submitting this as a talk like
Hmm.
last DConf Online,
Hmm.
or I think even the first one. But yeah, I missed the deadline and
Hmm.
yeah, never got to it. That's kind of how things happen with me. I have all these projects and they kind of go on over the years, and until I finally feel ready for to present them.
Hmm. Steve says in the live stream chat that he loves ctod. I guess he's a happy user. Have you gotten any contributions since you announced the tool? People been reporting bugs to you or fixing bugs? Or?
Yes, especially Steven, of course,
Mhm.
working on his Raylib code, found a bunch of things it doesn't do well yet. So he opened issues for them, and some of them I already fixed. Some others are a bit harder to do because of limitations in the parser library I use. So some macros the parser can't understand. So
Mm.
I kind of either have to improve the parser or do some manual pre-processing. But the ones I could do in a reasonable amount of time, I fixed. And he also contributed a bit of making it easier to build on OS X, which I don't have a Mac, so I don't know much about that. So,
Mm.
but he uses a Mac.
Well, your C background, Dennis. How would you compare your C experience, your level of C experience, with your level of D experience?
So I actually haven't written much C code myself. I know like some D users have like a history of C and then they translated their old C projects to D.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't have any C project like that. I first encountered it during a course for my embedded systems for my computer science bachelor. That's where we kind of started. Also, from some of my reverse engineering efforts, people have seen my DConf real life talk. So I did some reverse engineering for Super Mario 64, which was written in C. So that decompilation also gave me a better understanding of not only MIPS assembly, but also the C that generated that MIPS assembly. Yeah, secondly, translating these libraries, that's then also how I got to learn C more. I actually remember during an embedded system lab course where we had to program a quadcopter during my master's.
Mm.
That's a bit later than the first time I did C. And at that point, I already knew D. So I was like, oh, I got to program in C now, even though I know D. And so I was kind of aware that D has all these features like initialization of local variables and switch case fall through protection. And so I was like, oh, I'm not going to make these. I know them now, but I still made these errors, of course,
Mm.
even though I thought I was aware. But I also liked how I could kind of incorporate these input ranges into C. Like,
Mm-hmm.
even though it doesn't have them, kind of the principles behind them. So I could make a pure message protocol and make unit tests for them. So I kind of applied the things I learned writing D to my C code then. So that was kind of fun.
Well, I mention it because, I spent a few years programming in C. Even after I first found D, I didn't, go all the way on the D train in the beginning. I still had my C projects, but I thought I knew the language pretty well by, I'd been doing it almost 10 years off and on. I still keep up with the languages I used to use. I still keep up with Java. I still keep up with C. I buy books sometimes when they come out just to see what's changed, what's new. And I was surprised. I bought a book called Modern C Programming, and I was surprised by some syntax that I never knew about it. I don't ask me to specify. It had to do with arrays, but it's amazing to me that I can still find these things all these years later that I didn't know about back then. And I ask that because I'm willing to bet that there are some corner cases yet that you haven't accounted for in C to D.
Yeah, definitely. It's like limited to the things I encountered in the C code I translated. But for example, that's all desktop C. So I've never really ventured into the obscure embedded architectures with like 9-bit bytes or something like that, or other integer sizes. So I mostly stick to Windows and Linux and modern C. Also kind of C that's from decently popular libraries, not some obscure personal macro project. From Walter, I heard that people like to invent their own languages on top of the macro preprocessor. So luckily I didn't have to deal with that, but I know they exist.
Yeah, I encountered that very early on in my C explorations. There was a trend there among hobby programming communities, I guess, little communities online, where people were defining, they were making macros to define like begin and end for opening braces and closing braces and, whatever else. I never understood that. But in the process of developing the C to D tool, how big was your test suite? I mean, did you test it on a variety of projects, or?
My test suite was actually a bit of an afterthought. So because I kind of consciously make a distinction between the projects that I try to do properly, where I kind of plan them out and have unit tests, and kind of quick scripts that I write, like, I just want to quickly automate this part. But obviously, sometimes those just grow and grow until they actually become a lot larger than you intended. So it started with me just going quickly, okay, I have all these text replacements to do, write a bunch of regular expressions. Oh, that's not good enough. I need a parser, then use a parser to make some bit more smarter text replacements. At this point, it's almost a C compiler. It does some like expression type inference to add the .ptr to static arrays. So,
well, is GLFW the biggest code base you've tested on?
Yes, that's like 40,000 lines or something.
What's your accuracy rate? Do you have to massage a lot when you finish running the tool?
Yeah, there's still a lot of things to do, but for GLFW, I kind of developed the tool alongside that. So that's how I tested it a lot. Just run it on some files and see, oh, now I have to do all these dot pointer, add dot pointer. So let's implement that so I don't have to do that anymore. But there's still a lot of things, like still macros, like GLFW uses, I think, some macros to kind of switch between both dynamically linked function pointers and statically linked functions. And D has no equivalent for that. So I had to kind of expand those. Also, it has the GLFW API macro for functions, which the parser interprets as a return type.
Yeah, I saw that in the slides. Yeah. Ricky said in the talk chat there is work currently underway to support ImportC in Dub.
Yeah, that's very nice. I wrote the tool before ImportC was a thing, so I probably wouldn't write it now to the scale it's now, because GLFW, it's best to just use ImportC for that, I think.
Yeah, it's a pretty portable code base, I think, right? It's a pretty, in terms of C features, it's a pretty simple code base.
Yes.
Kind of like Lua. Why did you port GLFW to D in the first place?
So I need a windowing library for my OpenGL projects and didn't really find a good D library. The one I had experience with already was GLFW from a C++ project I briefly started before I found D. But one thing I always hated was on dub, there's a bunch of bindings, and then you just use those, but then at runtime it complains it misses the library, you need to have it installed. And installing dynamic libraries on Windows and Linux, like it's not a very nice user experience. It's a bit technical. I wanted to statically link. I thought that's obviously a lot easier when all the code is just in one executable file.
Absolutely.
But that gave a bunch of errors. And yeah, I've done a lot of attempts at linking with dub, like saying, oh, add to the lib flags, this library file, or add to the source files this library file. I found some really obscure bugs with like, why doesn't it pass it, and why doesn't it work? And I found like dub, it's really the best when it's just given a bunch of D source code.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, well, if I want to use this library, then I better just make sure it's a bunch of D source code. So.
Well, I ask because I remember, okay, I do not remember every project that is announced in the D forums, but I of course remembered your C2D project because it was recent, but I also remembered you announcing that you had ported GLFW because that stuck with me because there was somebody else who had done the same thing several years before you. There was a project on dsource.org called Schooner. I just had to look it up. I remembered it was some kind of nautical reference, but it was years ago, and it was more, I guess there was more to it than just GLFW port. It included other support for OpenGL. But the last commit apparently was in 2008. But yeah, you were not the first person to port OpenGL to D. And I promise you, he did it all by hand, he or she, whoever it was, or they. Yeah.
Yeah, I also need to clarify that a lot of times when I do things, like I often also just do things for fun or for hobby or to try it out, even though people have done it before. Like if I see clearly someone has done the exact thing I want before, then obviously I'm not gonna just redundantly do the same thing. But yeah, sometimes I also just do things like, I'm not saying translating the library was like the smartest, the easiest and most effective way to solve my problems, but it was also just a nice venture, and I learned a lot from it.
Oh, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. I mean, totally nothing wrong with it. I was only pointing that out as a historical reference. I'm all into the history of the language and the ecosystem, you know, especially since preparing for my talk at DConf in London. Yeah, you listed pitfalls in the slides, and you know, one of them jumped out at me was the passing static arrays by value. Was this like a hidden problem for you, or did it jump out immediately?
No, this one was pretty easy to debug because the regex library also had a good test suite. Mm-hmm. So I could see like something was wrong, and then just you step into it and find the cause. Yeah, it was one of the things where, because I did the translation all at once, and then you do have to debug after it some things, and that was one of those things that went wrong during the translation.
What was the worst pitfall that bit you through this process?
I can't really say which one was the worst. There was one, like all these mistakes just took some debugging time. None of these stood out as being by far the worst, although there was one which wasn't even a pitfall, which was me kind of eagerly mistranslating a memset. I don't know exactly remember the details, but in GLFW, it initializes some kind of joystick map, and it memsets the whole thing to 0. And I made a memset that was translated to something that was way too small or something. Mm-hmm. And afterwards, like the joystick didn't work, and like there was no unit test. It was just I use my library and the joystick just doesn't report anything. So that was a bit trickier, but even then, you know, oh, it's in the joystick code, and you also can narrow it down. So
I like how you pointed out in the talk the distinction between Walter's approach to porting C code function by function and your approach, which is just porting the whole thing all in one go. And I would like, yeah. I would point out now that, you know, if you're using Visual D makes it very easy right now to port function by function, because you can mix the C and D projects in the same thing. But
in the same file even, or?
No, I don't think in the same file. No, but I mean, you can have the D file alongside the C file in the same project, and then
Oh
you
yeah.
just link the object files there. It makes it really easy, and it's had that support for quite a while now. But please elaborate on that. I know you talked about it a little bit in the slides, but in the talk, but you didn't go into too much detail. So
Yeah.
why do you prefer your approach to Walter's?
Well, first of all, like I started small, so I know that as far as I know, Walter's main experience with this translation process was with the digital Mars, like all code, the front end to back end,
Mhm.
and the decompiler is like 300,000 lines of code or something, and it has a test suite, so it's a very big undertaking, and I would understand there you really want to just do it incrementally because it's really important to not introduce regressions. But for me, it started with these small snippets and went larger and larger, and I was kind of like, well, I'll kind of see when it gets too large to just do it in one go, and 40,000 lines wasn't the limit, so yeah, that was kind of how it went. I didn't feel the need to change my approach yet, but
Right.
yeah, for really large projects, and if you have a test suite, then I would really recommend doing it incrementally. But
And I guess you
you know,
would, the incremental approach, if you're talking about production code, is probably the way to go. Yeah.
yeah,
So tedious, but safer. And also, I guess porting whole hog is more fun. If you're doing it by yourself like that, it's no problem. Tell me about this online version of your tool. What's that all about?
yeah. So something I prepared for this talk, and
Specifically for
I
this.
didn't.
Cool.
Well, I kind of always wanted to just have a nice interface for it, like not just a command line interface, but
Right.
like a little website where you can just kind of like run.dlang.io, but for this C2D translation.
Mm-hmm.
And for that, you need like WebAssembly. So I needed to make it compile to WebAssembly, but it took a while to figure out how to also incorporate the three-sitter C parser to WebAssembly, because that's C code, and I haven't compiled WebAssembly with a C compiler before, and it also uses some C runtime functions like malloc and realloc and free. It also fopen or fwrite to write to standard error.
Mm-hmm.
And for that, it uses the WASI libc runtime library, which is like these C functions, but for the browser. So then I took some time to figure out how to compile that and to link everything together with my D code.
Mm-hmm.
And also my D code has some like array concatenations, which lower to the runtime functions, which don't have an upstream WebAssembly implementation yet. So then you need to find some projects that implement the runtime for WebAssembly and kind of use some of that.
Mm-hmm.
But everything came together for this talk. So now I have a nice little website where you can just try it in your browser with WebAssembly.
So, is this in terms of hobby projects? Is this your current focus, or are you looking at other things right now? Do you have your fingers in other pies? What's happening here?
No, I'm currently not like I don't want to scale it much further. Like I'm pretty content with how it is. I don't have any, especially with ImportC now, I don't have any plans to translate C libraries to D.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, still open to, like, if there's an issue I can easily fix or some suggestions or pull requests, I'll look at them.
You're getting some good comments here about the browser tool in the chat. Steve says, "Oh my God, never tried the browser tool. That's really cool." And somebody, Hegpets, says that browser implementation looks beautiful. Excellent work.
Well, one thing I still may want to do with the browser tool is add a bit of a better text editor. Now I just use a plain input field with a little JavaScript hack that inserts some tabs. But I think I like keeping things simple and plain HTML, but I think I'm just going to grab a code editor and just use that. I think there's some good ones out there
What about
that make it a little nicer to use.
What about attributes? You talked a little bit about attributes in the talk. Can you expand on?
So the function attributes, right?
Yeah.
The refactoring, yeah. So some of the C libraries, not GLFW, but like the PNG decoder and the regular expression library,
Mhm.
I also wanted to make them safe and pure because I like using these attributes. I think, it makes your code a lot cleaner and more portable in the case of no throw and no GC, especially when it needs to go to WebAssembly currently. But to do that for pure, you need to get rid of global variables. And for safe, well, C is not safe, of course. So that's a lot of refactoring. But I think it's for the better. Like, you have to, I see many C libraries use something like a start pointer and an end pointer and use some kind of pointer math to do some bounce checks, but they are susceptible to overflow and also kind of complex when you have all these variants. And refactoring to only use slices and indices, I found out it works a lot better because it's very easy to do a bound check on an index and an array length. The compiler does it for you, and there's no overflow there. And also the index approach also solved a bug in one of the libraries where there was a pointer to an array that then got resized. So you got a dangling pointer in the old array before it was resized, a classic problem with expandable arrays. And when using an index, that problem isn't there anymore because the index is still valid even after resizing. So I think the resulting code, apart from being, bug-free and ad safe, I think it also, is nicer to read.
Well, Attila is asking if you tried DPP.
I have to admit, I looked at it, but haven't really tried it. I understand it translates headers. It pre-processes your D files so that it can basically import C before import C. And I know it does some macro translations as well, probably a lot better than ctod currently, because that's like one of the weakest points currently, any non-trivial macros. But I haven't looked further than that.
All right, we are now. Go ahead.
So I
Sorry.
also understand like it uses libclang, just like dstep. Also, one thing I wanted to do with ctod was not use that because I don't like, first of all, how large it is, and also that it needs to parse valid C. Like my tool just parses anything to as close to a C ASD as it can, and also outputs any translation as close as it can. Yeah, when you just get an error for something small, it's really annoying when you have to deal with that, even though you don't care about it. You just want everything apart from the small thing to translate and not for the tool to give up on the entire file because it found something that it doesn't understand.
Q&A. Did you foresee a combined ImportC/C2D world? How can the two tools best complement each other?
I think for building C libraries, ImportC really is the way to go, because the problem with translating is the library updates, and then you also have to maintain the translation, which is a lot of work. So there I recommend ImportC, but ImportC isn't so good at translating definitively. Like if you want to change your C code to D code and then kind of continue maintaining the D code instead, so porting your old legacy code to D, I think that's where C2D currently still shines, because ImportC only works on pre-processed C files, and also the AST output that DMD generates currently isn't always valid. It's often quite ugly. So that's where I think C2D still has a place now. Yeah, and also when you want to ImportC, just imports the C code only to build, but if you want to refactor or add on to it, or use the macros, like that's currently a limitation of ImportC. It can now read simple defines, but make macro APIs, it doesn't have a solution for.
Ricky asks, what uses could you see for DMD to fully support D to C conversion, apart from making bootstrapping extremely easy?
I don't really understand the question. Like, how should DMD be? Can DMD be improved to be a translator tool?
Transpiler, I guess, converting converting D code to C code. Do you see a use case for that?
And there's always been talk about C backends, so that C compilers can be used to portably enable more targets than, for example, LLVM or GDC can provide for if you have an obscure target with obscure C compiler. Other than that, I think there even was a C backend made years ago for DMD, but it's not maintained anymore. But yeah, if someone picks it up or redoes that, then that could enable C backends as well as C translation in DMD.
So Walter says ImportC is not good for translating C code, just compiling it. And we have a comment from Spoofer, who I hope is not spoofing us. It says I've translated or attempted to translate a few C to D code bases, and it's the getting set up is not hard, but making it idiomatic D is still hard and a lot of work.
Yes, it really is. I can attest to that. Often I think after translating it, like, oh, just quickly make it more idiomatic, and then it takes my entire weekend for the 1,000 lines library to really make it idiomatic and have all the attributes like I want to.
Well, your number one client, Steve, says he plans on not updating his D translation based on continued development of the C library. Once he adds the D API, it will be fully D all the time. And that's the goal with C to D, right? Is to make a C library fully D, not to constantly update.
Yeah.
Q&A from Steve. Any ideas about having a way to script C to D to handle the aftermath parts?
Currently, I don't have any plans for that. I also have to consider to maybe have that not be part of the translation, but really act on the D code instead. So more, instead of C to D, becoming a D to more idiomatic D tool. Yeah, the C to D translation currently is not very principled. It's a lot of string-based things. I'd rather have it translate from C to D as quickly as possible and then just operate on D because it's easier to parse. It's just like context-free grammar. So then the translated C code, I would then probably write a tool using a D parser and then recognize mem sets and mem copies and translate those to slices and stuff like that. For loops are a bit trickier because you need to prove that the index is not being modified in the loop body. Yeah, it could make stuff like that easier, but that's just me thinking about how it would work. I have no actual plans or work started on that yet.
Based on your talk in London and this, you've worked on a variety of different projects. What is your favorite kind of code to write? I mean, is it parsers or is it graphics code? What scratches the itch for you?
It's really hard. I do like writing code that can be easily composed of simple functions. So that's the appeal of with parsers and translators. You can easily break things up into functions and then unit test those and optimize those. With graphics, I like graphics programming for other reasons, but what I dislike about that is you often have to batch things together for performance. So I often have like a shader program that does 5 things at once, and that makes things really complex. And yeah, I like various kinds of programming for different reasons. Not really one style that stands out like I love graphics programming over everything else, or I love parsers over anything else.
Well, what about solving problems versus architecting code?
I do like solving smaller problems more than working on large architecture. So,
well, I don't necessarily mean large architecture, but I would just mean, is it when you're programming, I mean, for you, is it more about the problems you're solving or how you're structuring the code? Is it more of an engineering thing for you, or is it more of a creative process for you? I guess which approach is it for you for programming? I remember having a discussion with Walter about this at one of the DConfs, and we were sitting at breakfast one morning, and he was talking about how what he loves about programming is solving problems, and I said what I love about it is creatively architecting the code, and he made this face like, what the hell are you talking about, man? So I'm wondering, are you on his team or my team?
I haven't really thought about that, so I actually don't have an answer ready for that. I would really have to think about that because I never really reflect on code that way, like if I like the engineering part or the problem-solving part.
Ali, Ali says, I sometimes like brain dead coding that takes me to a goal that I can see. Not thinking for a while is good. And Ethan says, I can't code without knowing what the entire program is trying to do. I read code while many colleagues don't. So anything I do inherently takes in the big picture.
Yeah, one thing I do like about translating C to D, by the way, is how it's also like the code is already there. You only have to edit it. Sometimes I wonder, like, would it have been faster to write my own code from scratch instead of starting with a C library, translating it, and then refactoring it to my own likings? But in any case, the refactoring is very like easy to do incrementally. You just already have the C code, you see something wrong, you change it. While the blank slate is the scariest thing for any creator to work with when creating something.
And Steve says C to D has probably saved me about 10 hours of work so far. That's good.
Mm.
You know, that's something I'm really bad about is automating things. I should have automated my bindings long time ago. I've done them manually. I guess I'm a glutton for punishment, but I've got the system down to a routine now. When I'm updating bindings or even implementing new ones, I just zip right through. I have the way I set up my editor and the header file and the D file and my copy paste technique. It's all there. It just goes quick, but it is archaic. Everybody automates stuff.
I'm actually kind of recognizing, like, I also like C to D is a bit of an exception in that regard, but otherwise I'm also not like, for a programmer, want to quickly automate things compared to some of like other people I speak.
Yeah, that was my next question. You know, I think it was a revelation to me years ago in the D forums one day when I realized a lot of people just write scripts. I mean, you got some task you want to do, you just write a script, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting, but it never appealed to me. I don't know.
I'm often like, oh, this is probably the last time I have to do this manually, so I don't write a script. I just do it, and then next time, oh, I should have really written a script.
But this is the last time.
For now, one more time, and the next time, still more grumble, until I eventually do write a script. But it takes some time for me.
Okay, Walter says, does it work by building a syntax tree or by translating it as it parses?
It does build a syntax tree, so it does have some problems in there because famously C is not like easy to parse without context. Like the first step it does is let TreeSitter parse it, and then my program starts working from that AST. And there is like some code that kind of fixes some kind of mistranslation of a multiplication with a pointer declaration or something like that. I recall doing. Most of the time, it's kind of clear how the C is supposed to be parsed. So
Dennis, go ahead and close us out. Any final thoughts, closing suggestions, or pearls of wisdom?
Well, thanks for watching my talk, and please try the tool. And if you find any issues or have any feedback, feel free to leave it in the GitHub repository. And yeah, thanks.
All right. And let's see who the winner of